My name is Julia Madura, and it's February 9th, 2011. Could you please state your full name?
Yeah, I'm Roger Arnold Breslow.
What branch of the military did you serve in?
Oh, Air Force.
How long were you in the Air Force?
Well, I was in 2 years.
What was the highest rank you held?
Major.
Where did you receive training?
Well, I received my training as a flight surgeon at Brooks Air Force Base in San Antonio, Texas.
What did a flight surgeon do?
Well, as a flight surgeon, you got training in medical aspects of flying, and then you only took care of the flying crew members when you were out in the field. They're a very healthy group, of course, but they do need physicians, and that's what you did.
So, what was your day-to-day duties? Did you spend a lot of time with men, or were you?
Well, in the morning, once I was out in the field, on normal days, you'd have office hours in the morning at the clinic, and anybody who was ill would stop by to see you. In the afternoon, you would start out by going to the alert facilities. We always had crews on alert, both the B-52 and the KC-135 tanker crews. They were always on alert in case they had to go out on a few minutes' notice if the Soviet Union attacked us. So you would go to each alert facility and see if there was any medical problem. To be honest, you'd socialize and play ping pong some too. Then you'd get back to the flight surgeon's clinic and spend the rest of the afternoon there if anybody else would stop in. Occasionally you would have to fly. You had to make at least 100 hours the first year and a minimum of 4 hours a month. On those days, you would just suit up in your flight suit and report with the crew you were flying with, and just go on whatever kind of mission they were on.
You mentioned a B-52. Is
Yes,
that
the bomber.
The bomber?
Right,
Well,
yeah.
Can you explain that? Were they small?
Oh, they were big. They were enormous aircraft. And they were designed for the Cold War with the idea of being a nuclear deterrent. We had aircraft at all times fully armed with nukes right on board, ready to take off on a few minutes' notice. Now, Griffiths was a SAC base. They had B-52s, and of course they would do the same as we did. And it was an enormous aircraft, but it's interesting, there was very little room for the crew. They were very unpopular with the crews that flew them. It didn't take me long to realize I stepped into a position of kind of poor morale, and we figured it was designed with crew comfort the lowest priority. It's very cramped. Most of the plane was Bombay, in other words.
You were talking about the field. What?
I mean, being out on a typical base, I mean.
Okay.
Once you finish your training, you'd be out, working as a flight surgeon at a typical base, typical SAC base, Strategic Air Command.
What was the equipment you were usually using? I mean, besides like the planes, I mean, what was normal?
Well, there's nothing special. In the office, I'd use whatever equipment like I use now in my own practice. Flying, I didn't have any special equipment. I mean, I'd wear a flight suit like everyone. At times you would you'd have to wear the parachute when you were either refueling or receiving or refueling. And of course you'd have to wear an oxygen mask at times, especially in the B-52 on landing and takeoff. You'd have to be on oxygen. The pressurization wasn't that reliable. Once we encountered what we call a rapid decompression in flight. That's when the pressurization fails. And if I live to be 10,000, I'll never forget the cloud of condensate that appears. And of course I knew right away from my training that we were having a decompression and keep the oxygen on.
When you had to fly the 100
Right.
hours,
Yes.
did you just, I mean, what were you doing in the flight?
That's a good question. Now, you don't do anything but sit there and observe. That's a very good point. I can't tell you I flew the aircraft or I did anything else important. The idea is that they want you for two reasons. They want you to observe the crew's duties so you can understand how medical conditions could affect their ability to do their job. The other reason is they want the crews to know who the flight surgeon is and be comfortable with them, so if they do have something wrong, they'll come and see you and not try to fly and compromise the mission. But I can't tell you I did anything but sit there.
That's all right. Before flying, was there anything, or any of the other men, would they do anything for good luck before?
No, I can't think of anything like that.
And the people you worked with, what were they like?
Oh, they were very nice. Everybody treated you pretty well. They got along well. You know, we were serving at a very, very bad time, and we figure we're all in this together. Everybody would help anybody else with anything. I was always treated very pleasantly by other officers and so on.
You mentioned killing 2 birds with 1 stone.
Oh my God!
Can you tell me about that?
Well,
it was really fun.
This happened at the bar at the Officers Club where we spent a lot of time. I mean, it's an old saying, killing 2 birds with 1 stone. Would you believe Colonel Byrd and Colonel Stone were both standing behind me? We had a good laugh. Of course, they knew I meant no disrespect. Stone was commander of our small hospital. Byrd was the deputy base commander. Oh my God, I put that on the paper.
You did?
Yeah, it's true. Well, humorous incident.
Who is the person you remember most from your service?
Oh, I don't know. It's hard to say. I remember the first wing commander we had because he was a very nasty fellow, and I used to sit at his briefings and hope he didn't look my way. I remember him. I remember his successor because he was exceedingly good-natured. Actually, his successor twice removed. I don't know. I remember our hospital commander. I remember a lot of the guys that I served with. I don't know if anybody stands out the most, though.
What experience left the greatest impression on you?
Well, I think it has to be serving on, well, I don't know. It either has to be serving on the Board of Investigation for a couple accidents which turned out badly, or investigating, I had to investigate a couple suicides, too. I think those things you remember. You have to remember something like that.
Can you explain what the Board of Investigation is?
Well, anytime there's an accident, I mean, these were both crashes which nobody survived. Anytime there's an accident, a board of officers who fly in that type of aircraft has to be convened to investigate. And obviously you look for maintenance factors, you know, physical factors, you look for medical factors, sometimes there can be medical factors. And that's what you do. You see the same thing in the civilian life. Anytime there's an aircraft crash, I think it's the FAA convenes a board of investigators to go investigate. And you do this to hopefully find out what happened and prevent it from happening again.
Now, I know the book Catch-22 and the movie Top Gun aren't the same war, but were any of the conditions similar? I mean, flying...
I gotta be honest, I haven't read the books.
That's all right.
Sorry.
What was your opinion on nuclear war?
Well, in which regard do you mean?
Just using nuclear weapons, I mean...
Don't forget, if you want to talk in our era, the Cold War, my opinion was if the Soviets were going to launch nukes at us, we better darn well be ready to retaliate. We hoped it would never come to that. I mean, you know the Soviets would never attack us when Roger Breslow was on duty anyways, but we hoped that it would never happen. But on the other hand, we wanted to be prepared as a deterrent to keep them from doing it. So I thought we were certainly doing the right thing by being prepared. However, the question comes up, you know, we had military industrial targets in the Soviet Union that we targeted. You know, we would, have target study when we were on alert. We certainly hoped we'd never do this. But on the other hand, you figure being in the air might be the safest place to be if this is happening.
Almost 3 million people were sent to fight. Did you think there was a reason that they were over there fighting? I mean, what was your opinion?
Oh, absolutely. I never questioned it. People didn't question government much in that era. I think it was Eisenhower who made, you talk about Vietnam, right? Yeah, you're talking the domino effect. Eisenhower talked the domino effect. He said if one of these countries of Southeast Asia goes communist, the others will fall like dominoes. Nobody questioned it, and it seemed logical. Now, the Soviet Union itself fell a while ago. We're commemorating Ronald Reagan's birth, and it happened during his administration. And you figure, why were we so afraid of the Soviet Union? Well, in that era, we were. They had probably appeared stronger than they were, but they did appear, bent on conquering.
Can I interrupt 1 second? Because
Yeah.
we're gonna edit this. I'm Caroline Wiegand.
Oh,
since I'm
Mrs.
the one
Regan,
that's
Roger
talked to you.
Breslow. Yeah, nice to meet you.
So Sue and I did the tag team because we
Oh,
have,
yeah.
we have 2 different meetings going on, and so I said I'll go to the first one, you go to the second one,
Oh.
and so I wanted to make sure I introduced myself before.
Well, it's very nice to meet you. I told them I was very honored that anybody would be interested in anything I had to say.
This is awesome.
Well,
okay.
I need to take a drink if I can.
All right, so that this is all gets edited, so that's why I thought I could.
Ready?
Yeah.
Did you hear about any protesting back
Oh,
home?
yeah. You used to hear about it, but there were protests all the time. In fact, when the Kent State incident occurred, I was overseas on Guam, but, what can I say? I was too busy serving to pay that much attention. It's everybody's right to protest, of course. We have free speech in our country. It's absolutely anybody's right to question anything the government does. But yeah, you'd hear about it. I didn't pay that much attention. I'll tell you one thing, though, I remember. In our training, you ask, in our training, we had I told you we learned medical aspects of flight, but we had to learn a lot of other things. One thing was an orientation to, we called it CBR, chemical, biological, radiologic. Today they say weapons of mass destruction, but one of the things, anyways, is a demonstration of tear gas, and a fellow, he set off, we had our gas masks on, we had to be quick to put the gas mask on. He set a canister off. Then everybody had to take the mask off and take a whiff of it. And someone said, boy, I can see why the demonstrators disperse when they fire this.
You said you were in Guam?
Yeah.
Where else did you go?
Well, that's a good question. I was on Guam because that was a very, very important base in the Vietnam years. They were flying missions to bomb targets in Southeast Asia from there. That's on the crossroads of the Pacific. Then I got sent there. See, even though my home station was in northern Michigan, a place called K.I. Sawyer, it's 150 miles directly north of Green Bay, Wisconsin. I was off and away on what we called TDY, temporary duty, like those accident investigations. So I got as far west as Guam and as far east as Torrejon, Spain. That's outside of Madrid. That's where the other accident was. But I got to an awful lot of SAC bases at one time or another in the U.S., I think.
Did you know anything about the use of Agent Orange?
No, we didn't have anything to do with that, no.
How were you received when you came home?
Well, that's a good question. I was received okay. I was a second-year resident at Upstate Medical Center when I had to leave very abruptly in September '69 to report to the Air Force. And when I came back 2 years later, everybody's coming up and shaking my hands and welcoming me back. However, you wouldn't say where you'd been or what you'd been doing. If people didn't know, you wouldn't necessarily tell them your way into service either.
Well, since I didn't get to talk to you, obviously you were recruited or drafted when you were in college.
Well, actually, I was an intern. The way I got in is different from, the way a doctor got in is going to be different from most others you interview. I mean, obviously, I was subject to the draft. I even brought a copy of my draft card so you could see that I didn't burn it. And if you went to a four-year college, you'd be deferred automatically. And I never thought about military. If you went on to medical school, you'd also be deferred automatically for 4 more years plus a 5th year for your internship. This was all automatic, just so you were still enrolled. However, your deferments, we had deferments in my day, would end after that. So what to do? Well, in the fall of '67, when I was an intern, the military would send you paperwork to volunteer for this plan. They called it the Berry Plan. It's named after, Berry was the deputy, I think, assistant Secretary of Defense for physician procurement. What you would do is fill out the paperwork. You could volunteer for a commission in the service of your choice. If you didn't, you'd be drafted in the Army as soon as your internship was over, July 1st, '68. But you could volunteer, I heard the Air Force treated you the best. I'd had a cousin who'd been in as a dentist, my cousin Ted. So, I put Air Force first, Navy second, Army third. I felt lucky I got Air Force. If you wanted to be trained in a specialty, you would put down the specialty. Mine was internal medicine. Well, they don't need many internists. My year, there were 800 to 900, I think, who applied in internal medicine. You only needed 200 to 300. So I didn't get that. So I figured I got one more year though, at least to continue training. So at least I took that. If I didn't take any of that, I would have been drafted in the Army in July of '68. But instead, I had another year to '69. You know, I'm good at predicting things. I figured the war will be over by '69, and I probably won't have to go. And I put it off anyways. Of course, it turned out that was the peak of Vietnam. One thing is that the draft went to age 26, but if you were deferred to go to medical school, you could be drafted if you were 35. That's how they got doctors. And I knew of a couple of doctors in town, one who's still around, who were in practice and were drafted right out of a practice. Pow, they were yanked and had to report in uniform. Yeah, Dr. Spath, if you know him, Thomas Spath was one.
Wow.
Dr. Ed Bradley, who was in Slocum, my future employer, the same.
I know him.
He did too. I think he was in practice, then he had to leave abruptly and come back.
Wow.
Dr. Bashan too, if you remember him, Gordon Bashan.
Okay.
He wasn't here then, he was in Seattle, Washington, but he got drafted.
Wow.
That's how they got doctors.
So then when you got back,
Yeah.
you finished up your internship.
Well, residency. I was a
So-
second-year resident.
Oh, you were
when I
second year
went.
resident when you, okay.
I got one more year. That would take me up to through the first year of residency. Then, at their convenience, they didn't call me right away either. See, the training year is from July 1 to July 1, and I didn't have to report till the 28th of September. So I had started the second year. Then I came back 2 years later and just resumed it. I mean, the position was there for me.
Did you get to reap the rewards of the GI Bill of Rights
Oh,
then
yeah.
at that
When I
point?
came back, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
then that was beneficial.
Yeah, you were considered a trainee, and you got a certain stipend each month. I think it wasn't that much by today's standards, but we've had a lot of inflation since. Yeah,
So now being in the Air Force then, you were on a ship the whole time.
I don't know.
You weren't on a ship the whole.
Well, the only time I was on a ship was when we were looking for the wreckage of the aircraft in Upper Lake, Michigan.
Oh, okay.
I wasn't personally looking, but the Coast Guard provided a ship, and I went out with them.
Okay.
I went out with them a few times.
Yeah. Okay. See,
Oh.
I'm like missing some of the background information that you got from before. So you asked all about basic training, I'm assuming.
Well, it wasn't basic training like others go through. I mean, we'd already received our commission. I mean, they gave you some very low-keyed lessons on how to wear the uniform, when to salute. They didn't want to waste a lot of time teaching you things like doing calisthenics and firing a gun and all that. The attitude was, hurry up and teach the docs what they got to know and get them out working where we need them. They didn't teach you a whole lot of stuff you didn't have to know.
Right. So that's what they wanted you.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
This is all different for you're going to talk to enlisted troops or
Yeah.
others. A doctor is called a direct commission, that you just receive your commission direct. You just sign and instantaneously you're a commissioned officer.
Did they give you a higher ranking then?
Yeah, when I received my reserve commission, when I was an intern, I was a first lieutenant. A doctor would go on active duty as a captain. That was automatic. Then on the 5th anniversary of your medical school graduation, you'd be a major. That was all automatic. That sometime when I had a few months to go, they lowered the requirement for major from the 5th to the 4th anniversary. So I became a major for the last few months. It's all automatic. I didn't have to do anything distinguished. Well, they lowered the standards, that's how I made it. But seriously, that's how it came about.
Okay. That's interesting.
Yeah, it's all different you're going to talk to people who were drafted, people who were enlisted. Now, I said I was in the Air Force for 2 years. For a doctor, it was only a 2-year requirement, regardless of the service. If you enlisted in the Navy or the Air Force, it would have been 4 years. Drafting was 2 years for the Army. But for a doctor, as I say, it was only 2 years, regardless of the service.
So were you ever with people that were there that were just, conscientious objectors or did not want to be there, or?
Well, there were enough people who didn't want to be there, but if you were really a CO, a conscientious observer, a conscientious objector, you'd make it known and you could get out. There were a few. Actually, I was a roommate for a time with the guy who was. He was the Red Cross representative on our base. He wasn't a troop, but he lived in the bachelor officer quarters, and we did share one apartment. So he was a CO, I guess. I later heard, years later, that there was a CO in our class that when he got to Guam, he applied for CO status and was dismissed. And that might be why a lot of us, that's why this particular fellow that told me had to go to Guam, TDY, and that's why a lot of us did, I guess, because there was a vacancy.
Okay.
I mean, people, you know, if you are a CO, you object, you know, it's in the conscience, what can I say?
Yeah, yeah. Oh shoot, I just had it and now I lost it.
Wow.
Oh, it's that over 50 brain now.
Oh, tell me about it.
It was about, oh, your responsibilities.
Yeah.
I mean, you've talked about your training's different, your responsibilities were gonna be different. So what about in terms of leisure life? Was that treated differently too? Like, were you, did you have time off
Oh,
like
yeah.
everybody does? And what did you do with
Yeah.
that? And,
Well, my normal day, you know, duty hours from 8 to 4:45. If I wasn't on call that night, like any doctor, you have to be on call like once a week. I was free. I just go to my, you know, I go to the BOQ, change into civilian clothes. I could go to the officers' club and eat or have a drink, or I could go into town and eat. Or there was a university in the town, Marquette, Michigan, and I occasionally went to their, football games. There was a pro hockey team there. You know, any recreation, you could do
Yeah.
whatever you wanted.
yeah.
Yeah.
So your Vietnam experience is very different than a lot of other Vietnam
Well, I never served in
experiences.
country. I only served on Guam, and actually for a fairly short time. Yeah. I served during the Vietnam era, and that's how I got yanked and put on duty. But no, I didn't have a bad experience.
Well, that's good then.
Yeah.
So is this something that you would recommend to these young ladies, that being in the military is a good thing?
Well, I think it's good to serve your country. I'll admit I never would if it wasn't for the draft. But, you know, you're proud to serve your country. You know, the country's been good. My grandparents came here with the clothes on their back. The country's been good to us. So, you know, you try to pay back. It's true.
Good.
They came here with the clothes on their back. They did well operating small businesses. My parents' generation did better. My brother and I's generation has done better. So, you know,
So where did your grandparents come from?
they came from Belarus. What's now Belarus.
And where did they go to, New York City then?
No, New York, Massachusetts.
Oh,
They
okay.
settled around Boston.
Okay,
That's where I was born, outside of Boston.
okay,
Yeah.
neat. And then are your parents,
Well, they're not here.
they're both
Yep.
from here then?
Well, yeah, they were born, my father was born in Western Mass. My mother was born in Boston. Yeah, they settled in, you know, Boston area.
Very nice. I think I have thought, I mean, all the things that he was talking, is there anything that,
No,
from
I
the
went,
list that we didn't cover?
No, I went through everything. So,
Okay. Anything you can think of? No? Okay. Or do you belong to anything like VFWs or
I
any
belong-
of that
well,
type of thing?
Well, I belong to the
Just thinking
American
about that.
Legion. I have for a while now. Most people of my generation, we came back, didn't want anything to do with anything, and didn't join any veterans organizations. But as years go on, it dawned on me we're losing the World War II vets who are the backbone of the American Legion. I think we're losing about 1,000 a day, something like that. And it dawned on me that the American Legion and other groups, they lobby for veterans. And that's important. Our veterans need all the lobbying they can get, all the help they can get. So this thing would come in the mail from time to time to join your state's headquarters post. It just exists on paper, but at least you'd pay your dues and support the Legion. So I said, yeah, maybe I should. It's only about, might be $15, I don't know. It's not very much. So I joined. Well, then it turned out the commander of our local post in New Hartford, 1376, is a neighbor. I never knew. I mean, his son Mike used to hang out with my son Matt a little bit when they were young. And I never knew him. He's a good neighbor, but I never knew he was a veteran. He never knew I was. But he said he's commander of the post. He said, Doc, he said, You ought to join our post, join your local post the next time you have to renew. He said, here, let me bring you the paperwork. Just bring it to me when you go out walking some night. So I said, sure, I'll do it. So I've been a member of Post 1376 New Hartford since.
Oh, that's great.
But it took a while. I'm too busy to be that involved in the post as a doctor, but it is true, they lobby for veterans, and our veterans do need all the help, they can get.
Well, not to mention the good things that the Legion does for
Yeah.
other people. Both of my children went to Boys and Girls State.
Yeah.
And I need to talk to these girls about what Girls State is, because
It's a nice thing. My son
a nice
actually
thing.
went. We also sponsor Legion Baseball. That's important.
right, absolutely.
I got a kid in my street who had played.
It's a big deal.
It's a good organization to be a part of. I'm proud to be a part of it, of course.
Well, you give time, but you reap rewards as well.
Yeah.
From your service.
Yeah.
Which is, why we're all thankful for what you have done.
Well, thank you. Yeah, well, it's true. I didn't have a bad experience. I did have to put my career on hold for 2 years
Yeah.
now.
So how did you end up here in New Hartford?
Well, when I finished my residency, of course, I was kind of homesick when I came to Syracuse to go to med school. I'd lived all my life in southeastern New England, never been so far from home. But very quickly, I had a whole new circle of friends. I found this isn't a bad place to live. And when it came time to look for a place to practice, I was looking around. Slocum was looking for another internist. The place came well recommended. So I thought I'd, give it a try, and here I am.
Very good.
You never know where you're going to wind up. Well, I said at a Rotary Club once, we had guys like the late FX Matt, or Stu Williams, funeral director, who lived here all their lives and affiliated with businesses that were in their families for generations. I said, I never heard of Utica or New Hartford when I was a kid, and I wound up here. Shows you never know.
Very neat.
Thank you.
Neat. Where in Boston were you from?
Well, I was born in Brockton, 18 miles south of Boston.
Okay.
My mother was born in East Boston, off of Maverick Square. When my father's parents came here, Grandma Breslow had a brother who'd come over ahead of her, and he settled in North Adams, Mass. And he was born out there in North Adams. But when he was young, Grandpa Breslow's brothers came over and settled around Boston, and he moved back there to be closer to them.
I have a lot of family and friends, Medfield and Weston and
Yeah, they're all around there.
Yeah.
I have one daughter who settled there in Wellesley, next door to us.
Oh yeah. My aunt had lived there.
My
for
daughter
some time.
Jennifer, the oldest, who's 38 this year.
So
Yeah.
how many children do you have?
3.
3. Okay.
One wound up there. One, Stephanie, the youngest, wound up in Brooklyn, and the boy Matthew lives halfway in between in Milford, Connecticut. Guys are going to realize there's not a lot of opportunity here, unless you have a profession that's in demand. This area doesn't have a lot of opportunity. Now, some people start successful businesses and make their own opportunity. That's good. But the days when you could get a good job at a place like GE or Chicago Pneumatic or et cetera, unfortunately, our area is depressed.
Well, our industry, we don't have that. We
Exactly.
don't have that in the country, period. So.
Well, I was telling them, it's true, especially here, though. When I came in '63 to enter med school, Syracuse was an extremely prosperous city. This area was doing okay, but it was probably on the way downhill by then. Now, I think Syracuse is regarded as a rather poor city. But what I was telling them, I had my 50th high school reunion in Providence a couple of years ago, the class of '59. He had to write a blurb up, for the reunion book. And one thing I said is that our county is very depressed. We've lost the population and most of our industry. But I've been paid for every day I've worked, and the community's been good to us. I tell you something else I said in it. I said that if my military service did nothing else, I don't know if I put it in the questionnaire, but I did put it in the reunion book and elsewhere. I said it did me one good thing. It gave me the confidence to go through the rest of my life knowing I'm a survivor. You serve on the Board of Investigation for horrific crashes like that, in the same aircraft you fly in yourself and et cetera. You get the idea that you've been fortunate and you're a survivor.
Absolutely.
Put things in perspective,
Did you ask about if he still has contacts with people?
No, I didn't.
No, not really. I called the one fella, though, a few years ago. I forget what brought it up. It was after the 40th high school. I know what it was. It was after the 40th high school reunion. And I went looking for my reunion. I went looking for my yearbook. It was packed away with a lot of papers like these papers. They don't have anything to do with the yearbook, but they were just in the same box of stuff that I'd thrown into boxes years ago when my parents had sold their house. Anyways, I got to looking at the Air Force papers. I found the roster for my flight surgeon class, and I was full of nostalgia. So I called a guy that I'd known. He's not that far from here. He's either in Bloomsburg or Berwick, Pennsylvania. It's within a couple hundred miles of here, I think. Not far from his roots. First, he didn't remember me, but I got to talking. He was actually the flight surgeon for the squadron that B-52 crew was from. And then he remembered all of a sudden. But you know, he was full of bitterness. He said, you know, the day that my son was born, I had to leave for Guam for a 90-day TDY because we had a classmate who was a CO who you know, they had a cover for him. And he said, I remember the accident because the wing commander called me and told me I had to go notify all the crews, families. And of course, I think the wing commander should do something like that. So he was full of bitterness, and so after that, I didn't try to call anybody else. God knows what memories they might have. So I haven't called, I haven't been in contact with anybody else. I'll tell you though, when I started practice, there were a few that I used to exchange Christmas cards with. The day I started practice at Slocum, I don't know how we knew, our old squadron commander of our B-52 squadron, Colonel Wertman, sent me a flower arrangement for my desk from Bill and Marilyn Wertman. I was so touched by that.
Nice.
And I guess I called Colonel Wertman to thank him after. I mean, he must have known from a mutual friend. There were a few people I was in contact, but it came right to Slocum at 430 Court Street.
Nice.
Yeah.
Very nice. Good. Well, how many minutes are we at then?
32.
At the end then? Okay. Anything else that you guys thought of?
No.
So you could probably shut it off.